Hello there and welcome back to another video here on Wrist Watch Revival. My name is Marshall. Thank you so much for coming along. This time on the bench, we have a really cool watch that I found on eBay. This is kind of the dream that I had when I first started doing watch restoration as a hobby, which is that I could find watches on eBay that weren't running and I could fix them and I could get a good deal on it. And I think I've done that here. This is a Lucien Piccard watch that has the interesting thing about it is that it has one of my absolute favorite features. It's called a complication on a watch, and that is it has a power reserve. That's the dial that, or the little sub dial you see at the top there. And that tells you how much longer the watch will run for. Think of it like a fuel gauge for your watch. And I don't know why, but I love a power reserve on a watch. Now, as you can see, it's not moving. Nothing's actually moving at all. And when I wind the watch, nothing happens. So not a great start. This watch was listed on eBay as for parts or repair, which are like my favorite words ever. It's a cool watch. If you take a look at the back here, Lucien Piccard, that symbol there, that spiral with the line, that's a mainspring. That's actually a part inside the watch that they used for some of their design elements, both on the dial and as you see here on the case back. And I think that's really cool. Let's take a look and see what the movement looks like. Oh, okay. So here we have an automatic watch. It'll wind itself as long as you wear it. It even has a signed rotor. You can see where it says Lucien Piccard right there on it. And I'm trying to see if it's actually winding, and it looks like no. And this is interesting. When I wind the crown, it does actually do everything that you would expect, but just no power's getting through. And that, again, usually means that the mainspring is broken, which is kind of funny given that it's also the logo of the watch. But it's not uncommon for that to happen. And then the other thing that I'll check here is the balance to see if it's spinning freely, and it's not. It looked a little sticky there. So we're going to have to investigate that as well. When you buy watches for parts or repair, you can't return them. It's just, as is type purchase. And that means you're taking on some risk. As I'm a little further down the way as far as the watch restoration hobby goes, I'm starting to feel a lot more confident about being able to fix many different things that are broken on a watch, but you can kind of take your risk as you see fit. Take a look at the dial here. It's actually a really cool dial. It has the up and down lines. That's like a texture on the dial. And then it has that sub dial at the top with the power reserve. And then otherwise it has the kind of normal hands for the era. This watch probably came out in the 1950s, maybe late 1950s, early 1960s, somewhere in that range. Yeah, I love watches like this. This watch costs me about $150 just to give you kind of a price reference for something like this. So to me, that's a perfect price for a project watch, right? Where if it ends up being a total disaster and maybe the best I get out of it is get to keep the parts from the movement, I can live with it and move on. But if I can turn this into a watch that somebody can wear and enjoy again, and I've only invested $150 into the watch itself, that's great. That's exactly where I want to be. And, it's interesting, too. They don't make watches like this. I mean, they just don't. Like this style, this size, just not a thing. I took a quick look at Lucien Piccard's website now. Completely different. The watches don't even resemble this stuff at all. And I like this style of watch. We'll remove the cannon pinion from the other side, and then we'll put the watch into a movement holder. There's numerous ways you can keep a watch steady, and a movement holder is a good one for that. We'll start by removing the automatic works. So the automatic works is kind of in two broad pieces. There's the works themselves, the gears and things that transfer the turning of the other part, which is that big rotor sitting on there, into winding action. So just the rotor and then the works itself. And we'll start by removing that. It looks like the bottom is just kind of floating there. Normally those are actually a little bit more contained, but it looks like on this older model, that's not the case. Let's see how this balance is doing. Still not spinning freely. Let's take a look on no. Well, we got it on the microscope, and you see what I see? That is what we call a bent hairspring. Wow, that is a horrendously bent hairspring. It's completely out of position. And well, it makes me see why this watch isn't able to run. It looks like this watch, maybe it took a big hit, or maybe a watchmaker tried to do something in there. It's a little bit difficult to say, but that is going to be disastrous for the watch. The hairspring is extremely thin and very, very fragile. And frankly, that's why I'm always so careful, with anything to do with the balance, is because that type of bend can happen. I wouldn't be surprised if that happened from a watchmaking disaster. Maybe somebody tried to fix this watch, because it's very difficult for a bend like that to happen through the watch being, dropped or something like that. The spring is quite resilient, but if it gets pushed or pulled hard in either direction, it will completely deform it. So I'm going to have to do something about that. I have been working on, I've been practicing fixing hairsprings. It's a very intricate, it's probably the most intricate, risky, kind of tedious thing that we do on a watch like this. And, but it's a skill that I'd like to have. And I've done it on a few watches on the channel here before, but I've been trying to get better at it. So maybe this will be the one that I really try to get it back into action. By the way, if you're interested in trying out watch restoration as a hobby, I did start a website with my friend Alex. It's called sutcliffehansen.com. That's our last names. And I have toolkits there. So, and in fact, they even come with a watch movement for you to use the tools on, so that you can take your first steps into watch restoration and have something to practice on. And then when you feel more comfortable, you can move up and start picking up things like this off of eBay. Anyway, it's sutcliffehansen.com, and there's a link down below if you're interested. Well, we're going to start this thing off with the standard process for working on a watch, for restoring it, but also for servicing the movement, as we call it, which is, if it was a car, it's bringing it in for a tune-up, right? And a tune-up on a car, usually means changing out fluids, things like oil or things like that. But it also means checking to make sure that everything else is going okay. Right? When you take your car in for a tune-up, they'll take a look and make sure the transmission looks good, make sure, the brakes are good, that kind of stuff. And you just do checks on automobiles. These watches are exactly the same thing. When a watchmaker that you take your watch to does what I'm doing here, which is take apart the entire watch, clean it, put it back together, they will relubricate it. So that's, kind of the changing the oils, but they'll also check to make sure that everything else is good. Now, we know that this watch isn't running, so there's going to be an added layer of troubleshooting as well. Kind of interesting to see underneath the barrel, there's a bunch of extra parts, and those ones are all there for the power reserve, so that you can see how much wind is left in your watch. I don't really know why I like that so much. Maybe it's just because I've had like a cell phone most of my life or something, and I just like to look at the battery, and watches usually are kind of a closed book on that. But these ones with the power reserve, they'll tell you. It can also be good for automatic watches like this, because automatic watches, they wind themselves. And so you often don't know when the last time it was fully wound, if it's fully wound, if it's working well. If you have a watch that you have to wake up and wind every day by hand, a manual wind watch as we call it, well, you'll probably just do it as you put it on every morning. So you kind of just always know that it's wound up. But with automatic, maybe you didn't wear it for a day and then you put it back on and it's still running, but is it almost out? Is it, and this thing just lets you know. Okay, we take the train wheels out now. Those are the main gears in a watch that make it run. They actually transfer the power from the mainspring all the way down to what we call the escapement, which is where that balance is that I took out first. And this is, by the way, one of the ways that the power reserve is shown, this little extra piece here, and the wheel that's underneath it as well. Basically, you have to be able to transfer what the barrel is doing to a hand on the front of the watch. And that's what these two gears do. You can see, interestingly, the wheel underneath this, by the way, you see how it only has spokes about halfway through. And that's to show when the watch is fully wound, it'll stop on one end. Because the way that automatic watches work, you may be wondering, if you wind up a manual wind watch, you get to the end of it, right? You can't wind it anymore. It'll give you resistance, and that's how you know that it's fully wound. But how do you know when an automatic is? Because you can wind one of those manually as well, but it'll just let you keep winding it over and over and over forever. And furthermore, when you move your hand around, it winds up the watch. What happens when the watch gets full? Well, what ends up happening is the mainspring actually will slide around the outside of the barrel. And so it will maintain full wind, and still you'll be able to put even more wind into the watch. It just won't actually, put any more energy into the barrel itself. It just slides around at that point. So automatic watches can get full, as it were. They can have a full wind, and they will let you continue to wind. It just won't transfer any more energy in. Okay, we can take apart the keyless works here. This is the part of the watch that replaced what used to be on pocket watches, a key. Like, you would actually have to carry a separate small key. You can still find them, just the keys for pocket watches, to wind and to set the watch. But they came up, it's particularly great for wristwatches because it's smaller, with a system that allows you to wind and or set the watch from the same point, which is the crown and the stem. And this is the little works that lets you do that. Now, this here is the actual automatic works. And as I mentioned, there's two major parts. There's the works themselves, and then there's this part that I need to take off in order to access them, which is the rotor. And a rotor, it serves a very simple purpose. It's meant to have a lot of weight distributed around the very edge of it so that it turns easily. So if you raise up your hand to wave to somebody, that thing will flop around a little bit. And that's all the energy you need to wind up a watch. All right, here's the mainspring barrel. Now, I'm under the assumption that this mainspring is broken. Wow, maybe it's not actually. Huh. It actually looks okay. I'll take out the, oh, never mind. Okay, it's not okay. It is broken. All right, I was just going to take out the arbor in the middle there, but it turns out that the broken part of the spring was just longer than it normally is, so it looked okay, but it's not. So that's actually a good thing, because getting a new mainspring isn't that tough of a fix, and that it is what I thought was going on. And if it wasn't that, then I'd be kind of back to square one trying to figure out exactly what we need to do. So I'm going to remove the mainspring, and we'll set that aside. I will have to replace it. By the way, you can see the shape of it. It looks just like it does on the watch itself. And now we can take all of the parts, yes, all of the parts, and put them into these little mesh baskets, and this will keep them safe for cleaning. The parts, when they're cleaned, are submerged in liquid. There's actually 3 different steps to it. There's a cleaning solution and then 2 rinses. But when they're in liquid, it means that they can't bang around against each other, even if they're being agitated fairly strongly. And so everything can stay safe and not get damaged. Before we put that in the watch cleaning machine, let's take a look at the case real quick. And it looks like there's a very old gasket still on the case back. Yeah, wow. That's an old school one. It's flattened. It's very hard, as you can see as well, which means it's not pliable. And so it won't do a good job of keeping the water out. So we'll need to replace that. And then let's take a look at the crystal. Yeah, it's just a normal crystal. And I'll be replacing this as well. It's dirty and it's scratched up. And I want to show off that really nice dial. One thing that I like to do too before I put the case into the ultrasonic cleaner is I do like to run some pegwood, which is just like a hardwood that you can whittle into whatever shape you need to clean or hold or push things through or whatever. And I like to just get the bigger chunks. The ultrasonic cleaner is really, really good at getting in places that you can't get. And it's really good at non-abrasively cleaning like larger pieces like this. But it isn't as good at taking off big caked on parts that, I mean, look at all that, dirt that I got out of there just from using the pegwood on the lugs here. It's not quite as good at that. It takes a really long time in the ultrasonic to get those bigger chunks off. So I like to do that manually. Okay, so all the parts are in our little basket here, and I can put them in the first of the 3 solutions. You can see that's the darker colored one there, and that's the cleaning solution. And then this watch cleaning machine will oscillate back and forth and get the watch parts all clean. Now, while the watch is being cleaned, I did want to say thank you to each and every one of my supporters on Patreon. I've got a Patreon for my YouTube channel here. If you like what I'm doing, it's a way that you can support me directly. I do send out a thank you card and a Wristwatch Revival sticker in the mail to everybody who supports me on Patreon, no matter what level you're at. And it's really easy to sign up. It's really, really easy to unsign up and re-sign up or change your amount. You can set it up however you like. That's the thing that I really like about Patreon is that, there's no commitments. There's nothing like that. And I actually have mine set up, not monthly, but I have it set up so that it charges whenever I actually put out a video. That way, if my life gets super hectic and I can't put out a video for a while, you're not getting charged for that. And thank you to each and every person who supports me there. Okay, now we also need to put the parts into the bigger parts, the case parts, into the ultrasonic cleaner. You can also use an ultrasonic cleaner to clean the movement as well, but I find that the watch cleaning machine is a simpler and faster way to do it. For the most part, though, honestly, the ultrasonic cleaner does a really, really good job as well. It's just a lot more steps to do. And here's how everything looks once it's out of the watch cleaning machine. Everything all clean, sparkly, and ready to be reinstalled. Now, before we start the full procedure of putting everything back together, we need to take a look at this hairspring situation. As you can see, it's a disaster. Like, this is, somebody probably moved the regulation arm, which is actually sitting right there on the left, probably too fast, or something was stuck and it totally bent up the spring. And that means that the watch is going to be non-functional until we fix it. And I'm going to take a shot at fixing that thing today. So as you can see, we have a huge bend that's supposed to be basically straight. And the way that we go about fixing this is we use 2 pair of tweezers, 1 in each hand, and basically as gently as you possibly can, you straighten it. And as you can see, even just what I did right there straightened out the rest of the spring as well, which isn't what I want. So this is going to be a process. I have to really have a lot of patience with this. And I wouldn't be surprised if the spring breaks just because it did get bent pretty sharply. They're very pliable, but they're so thin that if it gets bent too sharply, it will just simply break. But I'm going to take a shot and see if we can't get this a little bit better. Oh, this is such nerve-wracking work. Okay, we're starting to see a little bit of improvement. You can see the end here is where it really got messed up. And if I kind of pull it through the metal, it'll help straighten it out at least a little bit. Okay, that's a little bit better too. Oh, geez. Yeah, this is really tedious. Actually, there's actually some progress there. I mean, this is clearly a lot better than when we started, but it needs to be just right. Like, the hairsprings are very finicky. Okay. Well, now you can see the shape is much closer to what we want, but do you see how it's bent down and it actually crosses over that last part? So what you do is you kind of work your way back up the spring until the part that's bent, and then try to start to adjust from there. Oh, that wasn't too bad. Yeah, this is just really like the most patience testing part of doing watch restoration. I mean, it's a process, right? You do it one small adjustment, one small step at a time, and you work your way through each of the kinks and the little things that you need to do. And then you over adjust and you have to go back a little bit, and you just need to keep at it and not lose your patience, because one sneeze when you're working on something like this will be disastrous. But as you can see, you can actually make pretty decent progress if you're willing to really take the time to do this. And it takes a while, I mean, you're going to be at it for quite a long time, and maybe you might want to take a break, if things are getting frustrating. If you screw something up that, you had already fixed, it can be quite frustrating, all of that. But take a look. We're like actually making really good progress at this point. And sometimes you just need a little bend like that, to kind of realign the coils so that they're concentric. And then finally, you can get something that actually looks pretty good. Look at that. Can you believe the difference? Let's see if it'll work. Now, we don't have the watch fully rebuilt or anything, so I'm just going to put it into place without any of the rest of the movement to see if it behaves the way that I would expect it to behave. And I can blow some air on it, and that actually looks pretty good. I'm not going to lie. I had low expectations going into that, but honestly, just staying patient and making small adjustments over time seems to have worked. I'll be curious to see how it does when we actually finish the rebuild and get it on the time grapher and stuff. But for now, I'm going to call that a win. I never restored one quite to that level, and kind of happy about it, to be honest. Okay, we'll start our rebuild here. A little bit different than a normal movement. Again, this part I'm putting in here, that wheel with the half spokes, that's, what drives the indicator for the power reserve on the front. And again, the reasoning being that it needs to start at 0 and end at full. In this case, it indicates 36, which is hours, how many more hours the watch will run. But whatever the beginning to end is, it needs to be able to start and stop there, which is why you see a limited number of spokes on that particular wheel. And this is a driving gear that drives it. And there's a little arm, a little bridge that comes over to hold that indicator wheel in place. And now we can just screw this into place. These screws are pretty small. I would call them like medium size for this movement. Oh no. That screw just flew off, and now I have to get out the magnets and the flashlight to try to find the thing on the carpet. Oh, I found it. There it is. That's lucky. That doesn't always happen, but it is part of doing this as a hobby, particularly, is that sometimes a part's going to fly away and you're going to need a way to find it. And my way to find it is I took a ruler and I stuck a bunch of magnets on it, and I scrape it along the carpet in the area where I think I dropped something, and hopefully it shows up, which is exactly what happened here. But it looks like we dodged a bullet there, so I can continue the rebuild. Got the center wheel in place, and now we can take a look at the barrel and the mainspring, because I did track down a new mainspring for this. You can either measure the one that you took out, or if you know the movement, you can look it up and order it based on the size. And all we have to do now is just simply press the new mainspring into place. It's held down by this, kind of, oh, God. What is going on today? Okay, well, maybe it's a little more hard than I made it sound, because the mainspring came flying out because I didn't get it fully secured. Shoot, I guess that means I have to use my mainspring winders. Bummer. So I get out my mainspring winders, and we'll wind this brand new mainspring back into a shape that we can actually get it into the barrel here. And thankfully, it's not too hard with this particular tool. One of my favorites. And we can take the handle out, and then that'll allow us to just simply press the new mainspring in. Oh yeah, just like that. My favorite sound. And now I can put the barrel arbor back into place. Wait, this doesn't look right. The arbor doesn't seem to be hooking up with the inside of the spring. There's no way this is like a left-handed spring. Oh my God. Wow. Cannot keep anything on the bench today. It is a left-handed spring. Luckily, I have a tool for that. There's a left-handed version of this, and I can wind it back into that and then go on my way. But if I hadn't noticed that, the arbor only spins one direction, and it only will grab onto the interior of that spring in one direction. And that's why I noticed that there's a little hook, and you have to look to make sure that it's going in the proper direction, and it wasn't. So I don't know why this has a left-handed spring. Some watches do. It's rare. But yeah, maybe it has to do with power reserve, or maybe it's just this movement. I'm just glad I noticed it and I have the right tools for the job. If I could just keep things from flying off my bench today, I'd probably feel a little bit better about it. I can put the mainspring barrel into place now. And while we're on this side, I might as well grab the setting lever screw. It actually engages with the part that's on the other side of the movement, but you need to put it in first. Now we can put on the barrel bridge. That'll hold the barrel in place and keep it steady. In this particular case, the barrel bridge also holds the click and the click spring, which is pretty common. And once we tighten this down, then the barrel will be securely into place. One last thing to do, though, is to lubricate where the arbor meets that barrel bridge, and that just takes a little bit of oil. I just apply a tiny bit of pressure, and the oil will, through capillary action, it'll actually go right into place. Now I can put the train of wheels in. We'll start with the escape wheel, and then we'll work our way up to the other wheels. You just need to make sure that they're engaged. So that's why you see, there you go. You can kind of tell when it sits into place properly. You can feel it, you know. A little bit of 9010 oil. That's the thinnest oil on the bottom of the seconds hand pinion. That gives us that central seconds hand functionality. And with that in place, we can put on the train bridge, or the train of wheels bridge. And this one's a little more complicated. This one has, I think, 4 pivots that need to be in place. Maybe just 3. Yeah. But so that's not too bad, but still, you can tell when it hasn't quite seated itself fully, because once it does, then you'll see the wheels all spin together, and ideally freely would be good. But again, each one needs to be in its pivot hole, and you'll see once you get to that point that all the wheels were then spin together. Like that. And that means now that I can go ahead and tack down this bridge. Really curious to see if this, if my hairspring work will actually function. But we're not quite there yet. We still have a little bit of work to do here to assemble, well, part of the automatic works as well as the crown wheel and the ratchet wheel, all of which work together to wind the watch. The crown wheel is kind of the intermediary between you turning the crown or the automatic works doing its thing. And in this case, this little wheel here is part of the automatic works. We don't have the rest of the automatic works together or on yet, so it's just going to have to sit for now. But as you can see, it's held tight by this tension spring. So we'll reinstall that before we get to the crown wheel, which goes right here. And again, whether it's the automatic works winding the watch or whether it's your fingers, that crown wheel will be turning. It does have a left-handed screw as well, by the way, so that means you turn it the opposite way. And that's a simple design choice so that when the wheel turns, when it's being wound, it doesn't undo the screw that's holding it down. It would be turning naturally in the same direction that would unscrew a screw. And I think that over time, you'd find that those would come loose more or less constantly. But if you make it a reverse threaded screw, then the act of that wheel turning actually, I mean, if anything, it would tighten down the screw. Ooh, it looks like I've got, yeah, a little bit of Rodico there, perhaps in one of the teeth from cleaning. So I'll just use a different piece of Rodico to take it out. Rodico's that kind of silly, that blue silly putty type stuff. And it has many, many uses, especially for a hobbyist watchmaker. You can use it to pick up stuff, to hold stuff, to clean stuff. It's really, really versatile substance. Okay, now we can start with the keyless works that I talked about before. The way that it works fundamentally is there's basically like a clutch system, a ratcheting clutch, where you can engage it or disengage it, and you can only turn it in one direction. That's the ratcheting part, and then the disengage and re-engage is the clutch part of it. And it's a very simple one. You know, the clutch in your car has two friction plates that end up rubbing up against each other. But here, you don't need that much tension. A car has actually huge tension. If you've ever worked on a clutch before, it has multiple springs that, you know, which are really just like leaves of metal that apply a ton of pressure. But on a watch, you need something that is relatively strong, meaning relative to parts this big. But if you look at them in real life, I mean, it's a tiny little spring. It just happens to be enough pressure to keep those parts engaged with each other. And really, that's all you need to have a functional keyless work. So you can see the setting levers in place here as well. And I'll put the yoke into place, but then I'll also put the intermediate wheels in, and then we'll put the yoke spring itself in, that big scary spring that's kind of sitting on the bench there. So this is an intermediate wheel that leads up to the minute wheel here. And the hour wheel will go in as well. But first, let's put in that yoke spring. Again, this is it. It's funny because that thing actually is capable of putting out quite a bit of tension, but it is small relative to really anything else that you'll, you know, encounter in day-to-day life, let's say. And again, carefully putting that spring into place. I do call that one the Born to Fly spring. And somehow we got lucky. Everything else has been flying off the bench today, but the Born to Fly spring decided to stay home. So that's nice. Again, another use of Rodico here. This is just to clean up any excess grease used on those parts. You don't want extra grease flying around. You want just the right amount. Now I can put the setting lever spring into place. And I have to kind of hold it down and then wedge the arm over the part where it activates on, because it is spring loaded and I need to make sure that it's engaged before I fully tighten down the rest of it. Now what I can do is, now that everything's basically set into place, I can put the screw into place, hold down the plate, and then screw it into place so it works out safely that way. This is another area that does need some of this blue grease, and that helps it work better and for longer. And again, a little bit of Rodico just to clean it up. You don't want loose grease just sitting on top of the parts. And this is just a small cover plate for the motion works, which is the wheels and gears, the parts of the watch that actually turn the hands, that display time for you. It's a fairly simple part of the watch, but of course it is critical. Okay, now we can put on the pallet fork here, and that means we're really close to getting to test this thing out and see if it'll actually run again. We've replaced the mainspring, so that part should be fixed, but remember, all that hairspring work was the thing that I'm really concerned about, because I just don't know if I did a good enough job for it to actually run again. Okay, here it is. The balance going in. I would love it if I saved this watch. Ooh, that's a good start. Oh, it slowed down. Okay, but it does look like it at least wants to run. Is it running or not? Please run. It is not running. But it was spinning freely and looked much, much better. Now, remember, this watch also hasn't been lubricated. Let's give it another little kick here. Are you going to keep going? Maybe, maybe, maybe. Sort of. And then it came to a stop. So not quite, but it did look like it was spinning freely and relatively reasonably. So it could just be a question of lubrication. I'll put the cannon pinion back on the other side. Huh. Oh, it really wants to go, but it does keep kind of slowing just enough to stop, it looks like. Right? Oh, it's so close. All right, well, let's put it under the microscope and we'll start oiling up the jewels, because this watch hasn't been serviced in a long time, and maybe that's all it needs to really get moving. As you can see, it is running now, so that's a hallelujah moment. That said, it's still running a little bit slower, not quite as much amplitude as I would like, though as you can see, it is improving the more I oil the watch. It turns out oil makes a very big difference on something like this, as you may imagine. I need to, of course, oil probably the most important part here, which is the pivots on top and bottom of the balance itself, as this is a very, very high friction area. And as such, it gets actually like a special treatment. So take a look at how this jewel looks under the microscope. Do you see how there's that coating on it, the kind of that pattern you can see? That's actually dried on oil from the last time that this watch was serviced, which, you know, who knows when. And the oil will eventually turn into kind of a cakey substance. So what I'll do is put it in a solvent. I'll use some pegwood to clean it off. I'll give it another quick rinse in the solvent, and look, that's what it looks like now. Perfectly flat and smooth. This one even has a little sub ring built into it to help kind of hold where this lubrication goes, because I'm going to put this oil right in the middle of that, and that little ring can help hold it in place. I can just put the two pieces back together. It'll just sandwich that oil between that upper cap jewel and the hole jewel, and that'll allow the oil to be suspended directly where the pivot is. And you can see it here, that's bouncing around there. And then if I can just drop, I missed a little bit, but if I can just drop this over the pivot there like that, now the oil is suspended exactly where it needs to be. And you also, since it has a cap jewel, the oil will last longer as well. And I can just replace this shock protection system. This one's called Inca Block. That's the brand name for it. There's a few different ones. And that means that if the watch is dropped, it won't do too bad. Let's take a look at how it does on the time grapher. After a little bit of adjustment, 219 degrees of amplitude. Hey, that's pretty good, actually. The rate's a little high, and the beat error is out at 5 milliseconds. And I do want to adjust that. These are really annoying to adjust that on because they don't just have an arm that you can push to do it. Modern watches do, but here we actually have to take apart a part of the watch. So what I'm going to do is take out the pallet fork, and then I'll put the balance back into place. And this will allow me to see how the impulse jewel lines up with the pins. And it's a little bit tricky because basically the wheel needs to rest in that place. When it's done spinning, it needs to land exactly there. And the only way to change that is to once again take off the balance wheel. And then if you look, do you see how I can turn that inner collet? That will change the relative position of that jewel. And let's see what we came up with. Nice. Plus 3 seconds, 216, and we got that beat error down to 0.3, which is much more acceptable than 5. And look at that, it even ran for 0 seconds for a bit, so that's great. Now, one issue that I did find is there's a cracked jewel. Do you see that? The cracks on that jewel, that's on the automatic works. So I found a used automatic works, that's why this one's all dirty, off of eBay, and I bought it so that I can harvest that jewel from it. So to do that, thankfully, I've got a tool for that too. This is a jeweling kit or a jeweling tool, and it has these bottom parts that have a circle in it, and those are called stumps, and then the top part are called pushers, and you can just put them into place, and you can use the tool to very carefully press out and press in new jewels. They're just friction fit. They're not glued in or anything like that. So I'll use this to first remove the broken jewel, and so I can get everything lined up, turn this, and then it'll simply push the jewel out the bottom of the tool. And in fact, it'll just end up falling down to the bench where I can grab it as well. So that's coming out of the plate, the original plate to the watch. And there's the old jewel right there with its cracks and everything. And that means that we can now take the donor plate that I got off of eBay, and we can remove the jewel that we're going to be using. Same process. The pushers for this tool have a little pointed end. It's also spring loaded so that basically it will keep that pusher aligned with the jewel so that you don't damage anything. Oh, looks like the supervisor's here to make sure that everything's going well. And have we passed the test? Oh, we did. Okay, supervisor's going to move on to her next mission. And our next mission is to put this jewel into place. Again, these are friction fit. They're simply pressed in. So this is the replacement jewel with no cracks. And I will now simply press it into place just like that. You can use the gauge that's on the side of the jeweling tool to make sure that it's at the correct depth as well. Okay, so with that replaced, now we can set our attention onto the case because we do need to install a new crystal onto this watch. This thing is getting the full treatment. I mean, this has ended up being quite a project for an eBay find. But I'm excited about it. This is the type of watch that I really like. It's got a very vintage thing going on. It has a cool little complication. And yeah, that crystal looks good to go. So we'll call that job done on the crystal. And now we can put on the dial and the hands. Before we do, we'll put on the hour wheel here, and as well as this little washer that goes in between. It's called the dial washer. It basically just keeps that hour wheel down. It actually has the ability to kind of move up a little bit. But even just a super thin little washer like that will keep it down. And that means that the hands will stay in alignment. If that wheel does move up, you can find that, things can get out of alignment pretty quick. This dial doesn't really need much help. It's in really good shape. I'll just use a swab with a little bit of water just to get any standing dirt or dust, but it doesn't really look like there's much there. And I will warn you to be very, very careful if you do decide to try out watch restoration, that dials are very, very finicky. You may think that it looks like it has dirt on it and you could just clean it off. You probably can't. There's usually multiple layers of clear coats, inks, paints, that kind of stuff on a dial like this. And if you start scraping those up, you're going to make the dial way, way worse. All right, we'll start by putting the hour hand into place. And then we can put the minute hand in as well. Now this watch doesn't have a date function, so I can pick whatever hour I'd like, but I'm going to start with noon. Why not? It's easy to see. I've got a hand press tool here that I like to use. I also have a handheld version that works just fine. This one I think helps align things a little bit better, and it was an awesome Christmas gift that I got a couple of years back, so I love using it, but you can use the handheld version, no problem. Now I can put the seconds hand on. I like to just use the edge of the little pusher thing there just to secure that into place. Okay, now I need to wind up the watch all the way. So I'm going to wind it just 40 times or something, because it's time to put on the power reserve indicator hand, and I need to know where the watch is at, either completely empty or completely full. So I'm going to do it completely full. Although, this is just bothering me. Ever since I saw this thing, that hand just looks too long to me. Do you see how it goes into the numbers? And I don't like it. And normally, do you see, this is when I first got the watch. Do you see how the hand goes all the way down through the 36? I'm going to cut it. I don't care. I know this is a little weird. I'm just going to use my end cutters to trim down this hand, and I'm just going for it because it does not look right to me, and I want it to look right. And normally I wouldn't do something like this, but it really is bothering me just aesthetically that hand just looks too long. So I'm clipping it. Nobody can stop me. Let's see how it looks now. Oh, that's much, much better. See, I just wanted to come down to that little track so that you can read it, but not go into the numbers. Oh, I feel better. That was really bugging me. Again, just from kind of an aesthetic standpoint. And I'll make sure that this thing's in place as well. Now we do need to replace the gasket for the case back here. Again, that one that we got when we first opened it, it was that kind of hard gray plastic one, and that one's seen better days. So we're going to use a nice new one here. I'll use this air blower just to make sure that there's no little fibers or dirt and debris on either the dial or on the crystal. And then I can start to case the watch. This one actually has a couple of extra steps because you'll notice here, I still haven't put on the automatic winding works, and I'm going to put that on last. So that part's still to come because again, this is an automatic watch, and I'll do that now. You can see these are the reversing wheels here. I've never actually seen a system quite like this, though they're all similar. Well, they're all similar except for the ones from Seiko that have these pawl arms that do it, but most of the Swiss ones look pretty similar to this. And so I can reassemble those wheels, and once again, just make sure that everything's lined up and then screw it down. And then the last thing that'll go in for the automatic works is the rotor. And this little arm plate here holds the rotor in place so that it doesn't come off with this little baby screw. And I'll use a little tiny screwdriver for this as well. This is not a high torque situation. This is just a holder plate. And then I can just really quickly test to make sure that the watch is being wound regardless of which direction the rotor spins. And it looks like everything was good there. And that means I can put the case back on this thing. There's that really cool case back with, again, it's like a mainspring and a watch dial kind of combined, which is pretty cool. And take a look at this beautiful little vintage watch that we finished up here. How good does that look? And we can even put a new strap on it. Whoa. Oh, wow. That's interesting. I've never actually seen a 17 millimeter lug width. I don't actually have a strap that would fit that. I have a 16. So I guess we'll just have to go with that for now. And maybe I'll try to track down a 17 millimeter strap, but kind of funny. I've never actually seen that as a size at all. But yeah, this is beautiful. You know, this is the type of watch that I love to work on, right? This is something that you could work on. If you found it on eBay, you know, again, 150, 160 bucks, you can get this thing as for parts or repair. And yeah, you're going to have to buy some parts for it. I had to buy a couple of extra things, but you know, for under 200 bucks, this is what you get. It's running well. It looks cool. It's got a nice complication. It's got a lot of character. You always have to wonder what kind of life a watch like this lived, right? That's part of the fun of owning vintage stuff like this. And you get a neat dial and all that for that price. And plus, of course, you know, you get to be the one to actually restore it. And also I can show you how the power reserve works. See, when I wind it up, do you see that power reserve indicator going up further and further? So that's how it displays it. It'll do that whether you wear it or not, you know, on your hand, or whether you wind it by hand, it'll show you how much power's left. That's going to do it for this one. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. If you want to find me on Instagram, I am wristwatch_revival. And beyond that, again, I just wanted to say thank you for your time, and we'll see you next time.